Great. Welcome, everybody, to our virtual roundtable on collections donation issues. My name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm the Director of Service and Outreach at the Vermont Historical Society. And we're excited to have so many wonderful folks here with us today. I'm joined by my colleague, Teresa Greene, who is our collections manager. And she'll hopefully be leading and helping to talk about a little bit about what we do as VHS. And answer questions and have a wonderful conversation about collections donation issues. And so again, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or use the chat as we go along. And Teresa, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we get going.
Yeah, so I want it to be high discussion style. Also, I think I might be having some internet issues, so if I'm cutting out a lot for people, let me know and I'll run to the other side of the building and see if it's better there. An idea of what it needs. I thought we could start by going this and what our biggest issue with accessions are. Am I okay?
Yeah,
I'm gonna
a lot. Yep. So
see if I can find better internet.
As Teresa goes to find stable internet, level buildings. So again, what we're
they're in Montpelier or what? But isn't that horrible?
What Teresa, I think, asks us to share is if you can share a little bit about sort of your accession processes or process, and then your biggest collection issue. So again, feel free to put that in the chat if you'd like, or if anybody wants to sort of wave their hand and talk a little bit about, again, what your accession procedures are and your biggest collections donation issue. And we'll start from there.
Okay, I'm right next to the router. So if this doesn't work, nothing will. But to give an example, I'll just tell you about our accession process first and our biggest issue. So our process, the first step is that people, I'm the first stop. People come to me and offer an object. And if it's a duplicate, I'm the most likely to know, so I can end it right there if it's something that we know that we're not going to take. The second round is that I present it to Amanda and Steve. Steve is our overall director, and Amanda is the director of collections and access. And then as a group, quarterly, we present it to the collections committee of the board. And they have the final say on what comes in. And at the board meeting at large, they present that list to the board, but it's already been approved. The board as a whole does not approve accessions; they only approve deaccessions. Our biggest issue is people bringing stuff to us without paperwork, so we can't prove that we're the owners of it. And with the Vermont abandoned property law, we have to keep it for 10 years, then publish it in the newspaper 3 times, and then wait 190 days. And so it's a big, long process. So our biggest issue is intake paperwork and making sure that people know that we're not their attic, that we're a museum. So does anyone else want to share what their current process is and what the biggest issue that they're facing is?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the law and just what has to be done to prove ownership?
Yeah, I can outline that. Just before we do, to confirm that nobody. What, I am? You're.
Yeah. Waterbury Historical Society. We operate pretty much the same way and have a problem in getting paperwork. What happened during the pandemic is probably happened to many of you. People were cleaning out their attics, garages, and everything. And we often get we're next door to Duxbury. And so people have lived in Duxbury, but gone to school in Waterbury. And so they're bringing us their school memorabilia, and we don't want Duxbury. So it's and there are other towns, we're close to Stowe and we get stuff from Stowe. And so what we've been doing, we've had over 400 items that we've just gone through that were dumped on us pretty much. And we're slowly going through that now to see what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. And I wasn't aware of that law because we don't have paperwork on a lot of stuff. So
Barbara's aware of
if you
that
could
law, and she has mentioned
tell
it
us the-
before. So I'm aware of it, but I don't know the details of
Right.
it.
And so it would be the Vermont abandoned
Property law.
property law.
Yes, if you want to see the whole text of the law, you can Google Vermont laws and then museum, or Vermont Historical Society will pull it up. So to overview all of the applicable laws, there's a couple. One is that you have to keep records of donations of objects and documents, everything that comes in. And it doesn't specify exactly what those records have to be, how intense.
Yep,
It's
keep
just,
records.
yeah, you have to prove that you have ownership of them, and you have to
What is
keep a
proof?
record of who gave them to you.
You have in hand.
Sorry, what was that? In some museums, and what we used to do was one single book where we just listed out the donor, what the object was, and the date. And currently we don't for those records, the old ones, we consider that in-house enough to establish ownership. But today for incomings, to establish ownership, we have to have a piece of paper that is signed by the donor that explicitly states that we own it now. And if you don't, if you can't prove that you own it, somebody else could make a claim on it. So if you need to deaccession it and sell it, you can't legally sell it because it doesn't legally belong to you. And it doesn't come up a whole lot with smaller museums like this. When it tends to become a problem is when things are monetarily valuable or historically valuable, so that people pay attention. And you never want to be accidentally breaking the law, but you definitely don't want to be breaking the law when people are looking. So before you're ever dealing with something that people are excited about, make sure that you have the documentation that you own it. And if you can't find that documentation, there is luckily a process to establish that you are the owner of it. And that's the abandoned property law. And it's intensive and expensive, and you have to do it for things that you want to get rid of that you can't prove that you own. But I recommend that you also do it for things that you want to keep to prove that you own them. So what you have to do is you have to have the object in hand for 10 years. Usually that piece is applying to loans. If somebody gives you something on loan and then say they die or they move and you can't find contact with them. For most of, I think, what we're dealing with is going to be stuff that we've had for an indeterminate amount of time, hundreds of years sometimes. And then you post it in, if you don't know who gave it to you, you have no paperwork at all, you post it in your local newspaper, and it has to be the newspaper. It can't be an online repository. And the law states what the wording of the intro paragraph is. Basically, our museum at this location, have these things, and if you know who owns them, please reach out to us. And then you have to write a detailed description of the object. And it doesn't specify how detailed the description has to be. So we are assuming that it can't just be a Civil War sword. That's not descriptive enough. But we also don't think that it needs to be the entire object description. And then at the bottom, you write that anybody who knows anything about the ownership of this needs to come forward, and how to contact you. If you do know who originally left it with you, you have to publish it in your newspaper and in their county newspaper, where they either currently live or where you last know that they had lived. And you post their name in the advertisement and an entreaty to both them and anyone who might know them, to get them to come and reach out to you. And you have to publish that for 3 consecutive months. And then you wait a prescribed amount of time that I think is 120 days, but don't quote me on that. And then you can finally get rid of it, or consider it yours if it's not something that you want to get rid of. Oh, 180 days. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Teresa. That was more efficiently explained than trying to read the law, which Rachel linked into the chat box. Thank you, Rachel, because I will need to refer back to that. But it was kind of gibberish to me until Teresa kind of explained it. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It's one of the things that we've been dealing with. We've been a museum since the 1830s. And we also took over the collections of the state. And one of the big problems that we found is that the state collected a lot of artwork, and people donated artwork to the state. And there weren't records from that. So not a lot of them are properly accessioned. And sometimes the records that we do have are that the donor would write their name on the back of the painting. So we've been able to find it in that way. And when they're donations that are that old, we're considering the records that are written on the object by the donor as enough of a record, that the intent to transfer it was there, whether or not today's paperwork was or not.
Hi, I'm Mary Lou Willits. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. So I had a weak moment. Often people bring things in to give to the collection or to be considered during events. And a woman came in, I know her, I know a little bit about her family history, and she has 2 garbage bags full of antique clothing, like half full. And she said she thought they belonged to somebody who was in Middletown Springs, but she wasn't sure. She couldn't really say. And it's women's clothing, men's clothing, baby clothing.
Oh, Jesus.
Actually in very nice condition. And so I did, I said to her, we won't really be able to accept these without knowing for sure if they're from Middletown Springs. And she said, well, just throw them away. Well, so we're busy, there are people in the museum. I'm the docent. I do get her to sign paperwork for temporary custody. And so then I did look through it, and there were some notes with objects, and I managed to figure out that, these things date from probably 1870 to 1930. And some of them are really, really nice, but I was able to determine from notes and initials and family histories that they are in fact from Paulet. So I have contacted the Paulet Historical Society. I don't know if they will take them or not, but now I have them. And I don't want to throw them away. Actually, I don't own them yet unless she signs them over to me. She doesn't want them back. She's elderly. And it brings up the whole question of what now do you do with these things? Who wants them? Can I sell them? It doesn't sound like I can. but where do they go now?
So that touches on one of our big issues internally. And we actually moved away from using a temp deposit form for most things. As just to summarize, in case there's anyone who doesn't know, generally what museums do when they take something into the building before it's accessioned, they do a temporary deposit sheet, which does not transfer ownership. The person who brought it in still owns it. And then the deed of gift, once the object is approved, is what transfers the ownership. So if you can't get the person to come and pick their stuff back up, then you're kind of stuck with this abandoned property thing where you have to wait for 10 years. So what we tried to do first was we put a check mark box on our temp deposit form that allowed for disposal. So if we didn't accession it, we could throw it away. But we were finding that most people did not fill out the form. They didn't want to fill out any paperwork. So what they did was write their name at the top and sign their name at the bottom, and that was it. So we still were stuck with all of these things that we couldn't get rid of and that they wouldn't come pick back up. So now we have switched to exclusively using a unrestricted gift form. And the way that we have, so we really try to not take anything into the building that we don't think we're going to accession in the first place. But sometimes you have to, and sometimes something that you really want, if you explain to people that they're giving it to you, but it's not accessioned yet, will scare them into not dropping it off. So we have a section in there that says that if we do not accession it, that they do want it back. And then it's accompanied by a terms sheet that says that we will contact them in the same way that we've already been reaching out to them, so that we don't have to write them 3 certified letters. And that they then have 4 months to initiate the retrieval process, whether that is paying for shipping or coming to pick it up. And then after those 4 months, we will consider it abandoned by them, not abandoned property, but after 4 months, if we can't get a hold of them, we'll consider that they don't want it back, and we will be free to do with it as we please. So it's the future instances of this might be able to be solved by changing up your paperwork and making sure that everything that is given to you, or everything that is left in the building, ownership is transferred without the expectation that it's going to be added to the permanent collection. I got so wrapped up in my paperwork spiel. Give me a second to come up with the second half. Okay, the second half of the answer was on disposition. So after you do determine that you own it, or you get her to state that yes, she is willing to transfer ownership so that you can throw it away. Since you haven't accessioned it yet, your collections policy will not govern how you get rid of it. So if your collections policy only allows you to deaccession by transferring to another institution, you won't be bound by that because they're not accessioned. So you can throw it away or sell it.
But where would I even sell it?
I would look at auction houses. We use Merrill's a lot because we try to stay within the state. There's also a clothing focused auction house, Augusta Auctions, in the southern part of the state. And if it's in really good condition, they can get you some really good prices. And they will still take it either way, because twice a year they do an uncatalogued sale, and they lot several things together in boxes and bags, and they sell them sight unseen. And so even if it's not what non-museum people would consider museum quality, you can find that they have the audience to find somebody that would want it.
Thank you.
Anne.
We have a similar problem. And we've thought of possibly asking local theater groups if they might want it.
Yeah, that is something that we have done too. Our collections policy says that we can't deaccession to individuals, but we can to groups. So we have defined it as pretty much any nonprofit, so or educational group. So we've looked at schools for deaccessions, and then also local theater groups too. Is that Jill or George? I see both
George.
names on the screen.
George.
Okay.
It occurs to me, as you mentioned, the paperwork that you are currently using, that it would be very helpful if we local historical societies could use that paperwork also. So first question is, can we literally use your form?
Not with our branding on it, but yes. I had to move away from my desk for the Wi-Fi, but I can send a copy of that form to everybody. And we have expanded it past the old temporary deposit form was just 1 page because of the terms. Ours is a couple, it's a bit longer now because it has the legal terms on the back that explicitly state that people have to come and pick up their stuff within 4 months if they check that box. And if they don't, then we can do whatever we want. And that leaves us open to using it with the educational collection. So as a prop that goes out to schools and is handled by children, or disposed of, sold, or transferred. So once it comes to us, they don't have a say in what we do unless they've checked that they want it back when we accession it. And then we also put in a stipulation about copyright, that if they are the copyright holder, then they give us a non-exclusive license to use it for uses that support our mission. Angie.
Had to remember to unmute myself. Okay, thanks. So follow-up question to all of this. What about, maybe the answer is as simple as you just have to, better safe than sorry, and you have to count it like it was a donation, but what if the institutional knowledge in the museum thinks that the museum purchased an item and it's like not, like we have a lot of reproduction things because we have a lot of hands-on, and so it's not, they're not even like historical or financially valuable, and a lot of them were probably purchased by the museum but like 30 years ago, and our collections paperwork is a mess, so we might be able to track that down paperwork wise but probably won't. Do we have to treat it as abandoned property?
So if you can't prove that you own it, then if you get sued, you're not going to be able to prove that you own it.
So we can, like, for something, let's like say furniture, like in our recreated tavern, we have a bunch of tables and chairs, and if I don't have any paperwork that says that like we own those, but I could just assume we're not going to get sued by someone trying to take our tables and chairs, maybe it's just not top priority then.
So I don't know the specific answer because I don't want to ever encourage anybody to break the law. But the law was written to apply to museum and library collections. So if it's really clear that this is not part of that they were bought as like chairs for a cafeteria, that nobody was expecting them to be preserved, then I think that you're okay, because we don't have to keep records for like our desk equipment and our computers,
right?
Ownership records, and we're allowed to get rid of those because nobody expects those to be part of the preservation holdings of the Historical Society. So you're probably okay, especially if they're breaking. I don't think anyone's going to expect you to keep a bunch of broken chairs.
Okay, because I guess it's just kind of especially at my museum, it's just kind of a line in the sand of what counts as collections and what doesn't. And so if there's so I don't know if you or Rachel or anyone has any other guidance about like where to draw that line in the sand or what verbiage to use to draw that line in the sand, that would be helpful as we're trying to like do an inventory for the first time in over 20 years. And the paperwork is a bit of a disaster. So what counts as collections and what doesn't? Because I have like antiques from the 1920s, and I have stuff that was like reproduced creations that were made in the 80s, some that were made in the 2000s. plus I have stuff that was actually made in the 1700s. And so it's kind of a mixed house.
Do you have a collections policy?
We're creating one. And that is part of the reason why me and one of my board members are here at this meeting.
So the collections policy can help define that. This is still a fuzzy line, but I think that you would be safe to look at each thing and ask whether a member of the public, a non-museum member of the public, would expect you to preserve it as a museum.
Okay.
So it is still fuzzy when you get to things like the stuff from the 1920s that really is a prop and is not something that you need to be preserved. But somebody who brought that into you as a donor may do so expecting it to be preserved. So that's where it gets fuzzy without a collections policy. But once that collections policy is written, I would say follow that. And if it fits into the stuff that is governed by your collections policy, consider it stuff that you have the preservation duty towards. And if it doesn't, then don't.
And would the collections policy retroactively be applied to things that were donated before that collections policy was adopted?
I would, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. But if anybody else has other opinions on that, definitely weigh in. Okay, I am popping into the chat to look at some of the
Yeah, there's
questions in there.
some great stuff in there. And I will say, I think follow up for Angie is really looking at what that intent, and sometimes it's hard to, tell back years ago what people's intent was, but I think that's really the guiding force to say, was this intended to be something that people were going to sit on and they were going to use and, it created a mood, or is it really intended to be preserved? And we're all doing the best we can for ourselves now. And I think, again, to just build awareness of what we're doing for the people that are coming 20 plus years, 50 plus years from us, trying to do well by them is sometimes all we can do.
Anne, yeah.
Thanks. The Old Stone House Museum has a relatively new collections management policy. And I think it's, fairly standard fare. Although we did put in a tiering system, which is great to help us evaluate incoming objects. And we're now considering making a change to the policy to add a category called utility collections that would be in addition to accessioned and permanent collection and programmatic collections. I think Rachel came up with that idea. I think it's going to help a lot.
That's different from programmatic collections would be like props.
Programmatic would be for education purposes. Okay. And I think our, let's see, what else is in there? Library, maybe?
Yeah, library.
Do you want to, could you expand on what the utility collection includes?
Sure, it would be the chairs that someone's going to sit on because they somehow wound up in the meeting space in the, in the office, or the table that gets used, or the reproduction clock that was given to the museum ages ago. That I don't know if there was ever an intent to exhibit it, but it's there in the meeting room as well. It's beautiful, has a nice ambiance. So things like that.
That's
and
awesome.
Also, things that could be repurposed. For example, someone gave us an old sign, but it could be painted and have a new logo put on it, new information put on it.
And what did you say the third one was? It was utility, education, and
except permanent collection,
okay.
Which would be the stuff that we've accessioned, and then the second category is programmatic. So that would be for the education department. And then the third category would be utility, which would be all the things you're just going to sit on and, leave out in the rain and use as, office equipment, whatever, office furnishings.
Are you just outlining the policies, or are you also assigning numbers and tracking that collection?
We'll be in good shape if we get all the education items into some sort of inventory and catalog. But I'm a board member, so it's really the staff. And I know Darlene Young is on the call. She would have a much better idea than I do. And all of this, of course, it takes a great deal of time.
It does, yeah.
And I wish I had an easy answer for you. I'm relatively new to the organization and I'm still kind of figuring out nuts and bolts.
All right, well, I'm going to open the chat and read some of the questions there. Okay. Have you received things, accessioned them, and then had the donor's ownership challenged by another who claims ownership? What is the institution's exposure there? We have. It was before I started, so I'll be telling the story secondhand by paperwork. So I have two. I have one where our paperwork held up and one where it didn't. And the first one where the paperwork held up, we had a deed of gift. It was signed over to us by the owner, and then the owner passed away and the children wanted it back. The children had been under the, they thought that it was a loan type of situation. So basically we told them that we owned it. It was against our collections policy to return it, to deaccession in that way, and that there was really nothing that we could do. And that was kind of the end of it. Another similar scenario was somebody donated us an artwork and then decided that they actually wanted to give it to a different historical society. And we did consider that one because it would still be in public trust and it would be a good way to maintain a good relationship with this person. But ultimately we didn't, just because we didn't want to set a precedent of accessioning things and then deaccessioning them at the donor's request. And one of the ways that it didn't hold up is we had a sword in our collection for a long time. In the 20s and 30s, it was very common for people to give things on permanent loan, and that was it. They just stayed with us forever. So if you have been open for that long, check your accessions from the 20s and 30s. They are probably almost all loans. And it had been processed in our collection the same as any donation, so it wasn't on our radar as a loan at all. And a descendant of the lender came and said, I believe that this is mine. And we checked, and sure enough, we couldn't prove that we owned it. So it was on her to prove that she would have inherited it. And her ancestor, I don't remember if it was her father or her grandfather, did not have a will. So the way that you prove it really is just a birth certificate with the donor's name on it. So she had to prove to us that she was his child. And it wasn't something that worked out super well for us. Because she proved that she was the legal owner, we gave it back to her. And it is no longer in a public institution. A fun one, since John's here on the call, I've been cleaning up our old loans and I found that we had a quilt on a very, very long-term loan from a department in Norwich University that had since closed. And I reached out to them to just close out the paperwork and they wanted it back. So now it's in Norwich.
Darn those Norwich people. And that actually comes back. There was a question from Polly in the chat as well, talking about long-term loans that they have at Bridgewater from the town. And sort of that question of, should we sort of renew that agreement every so often? And I'm going to give an enthusiastic yes on that. So please, every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever you all think is the turnover rate at the sort of town and historical society. But just to make sure that that's clear as you
Yes.
keep going along.
Yes, yeah, I would highly recommend having you don't want it so short that you're always renewing this loan, but you want it short enough that as staff turns over on either your side or the city side, somebody's always aware of it. We have on loan from the city of Barrie a weather vane, and we are on a 3-year loan renewal. And it's come in really handy as the city manager has swapped over to get that loan and a few other things that we have from the city of Barrie on their radar. And it's also a really good way to get the city manager to come and look at your collections and get familiar with what you have and know that you're a resource that they should point people to. Angie.
So I have a question that is kind of related to this. I don't know if it's going to completely change this topic about, abandoned property or not, but what about like Native American or Indigenous people's artifacts, and where do we stand on that? I'm familiar with there being like federal laws about human remains, but not about other artifacts. So maybe I'm just not aware or not. And I'm asking in particular because one of the collections projects we've recently started is we have about 70 boxes of archaeological artifacts from digs at the homestead that were done in the 90s, and they've been up in the attic since the 90s. So we're working with the Vermont Archaeology Society and Jess Robinson at the state to start a cataloging project and going through all of those, possibly submitting them to the Archaeology Heritage Center in Barrie for the state, and also identifying which ones we should be able to use for exhibits in the future and things like that. I know that there's prehistoric artifacts in there, and I don't know what to expect with what we should be doing with them other than the Heritage Center. I know, for the state has a bunch of artifacts, but the direction society is moving is towards giving things back to Indigenous communities or, the origin communities. So I guess what's the pulse on that right now, nationwide, in Vermont? Like, if we finish this project in the next 2 or 3 years, like, what maybe should I expect to happen around those items?
So NAGPRA doesn't only apply to human remains. It's also funerary objects and religious objects. And I think your question I'm seeing stuff pop up in the chat that it might be being answered there.
Yeah, John
does
says that it applies to other things too. And Catherine said that she also has the same kind of opportunity with their collection at her place.
Yeah. So it's basically anything religious or ceremonial is something that you want to consider repatriating. So somebody may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that NAGPRA only applies to federally recognized tribes, and none of the Abenaki bands are currently federally recognized. But that doesn't need to stop you. You can still repatriate things without it being under NAGPRA. And
as far as you're aware, do the Vermont Abenaki tribes have any sort of organized system for that to happen, or have they been repatriating artifacts?
We have repatriated things to certain bands of the Abenaki, but there's not what I would call a setup system, because I don't think that it comes up enough to warrant. It looks like Catherine says that they're currently undergoing a NAGPRA effort, but now they're looking at the items that doesn't fit within the NAGPRA categories. Yeah, and one of the things that we've found that we have a lot of are Native American artifacts that were, unlike the Ethan Allen homestead, were completely divorced from their contexts. They were collected by non-Native peoples in the 1950s, and they weren't really recording where they came from. So the things that we are repatriate. So we repatriated all of our human remains a long while ago. When we find something that says that it is funerary or something that is a non-ceremonial object that shows no evidence of use, so then may have been included in a burial, we are optioning those for possible repatriation. And the thing, there has a couple weeks ago a depressing article about NAGPRA, how infrequently it is enforced and how many institutions are claiming that remains in their custody are culturally unidentifiable and therefore cannot be returned, which is just something that I was going to say we have a problem with. It's not human remains, but we have a lot of our artifacts are not identifiable. They're projectile points basically, and hammerstones, stuff like that, that were not, they were culturally everywhere. And the best way to identify where they came from is by what rock they are. So when they're a really common rock nationwide, we're having trouble really narrowing it down. So those can be difficult to repatriate. And one of the things that we have floated has been bringing in an Abenaki consultant to say what they think their band would be interested in preserving, or what things their band would be interested in us continuing to hold.
Sorry, it's Catherine at the Bixby Library in Virgins. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, Angie, because this is literally last weekend, exactly what I was delving into. And I've always thought of this as in the 2.5 years I've been here as, Native American for the Abenakis. And so we've had some work, we've done a lot on this. And now have a better understanding that so much of this is archaeological. And so when is it Abenaki? When is it prehistory? And so it would be, and I've just learned about the Archaeology Center and the Vermont archaeologist and the history of archaeology in the state. And so any guidance that we can be given, these kinds of questions, so that if they can take the lead and have the primary interface with the Native American community, so that we're not individually trying to navigate and make these decisions that, anyhow, so something that's more formalized, and I'd be happy to help in that regard. We have some collections that have been given to us that are, we have some that are from other parts of the country that we're working on, but some that are from this area that are pretty significant and want to do the right thing by them.
If
Thanks,
somebody who's
Catherine.
been,
I was just going to ask kind of a follow-up to all of this. Sorry, Teresa.
no, you're good.
I guess I'm also wondering what the pulse is. Has the Vermont Historical Society or any of the other museums or historical societies represented here, has anyone felt like been approached by any Abenaki groups officially or individuals, or felt any pressure, or felt like there is any like initiative from them to say that they would like their stuff repatriated? Or at this point, is it like Catherine was just saying, mostly museums being like, we want to do right?
I have not been approached, and I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think museums our size, a big part of why we may not be approached is just because people don't know that we have these things. A lot of small museums don't have their full collections published online, especially things that may be not supposed to be there.
And there's also, just to throw more trickiness in this, and just to put it on the agenda for all of us for follow-up, is because I think this warrants another conversation, is being approached by other states who have federally recognized tribes, and that whole issue about who has rights to potentially what we have, like from New York or Canada.
I wish I had answers, Anne.
we have a skull, and the note on it says Indian skull. And it was part of Dr. Jane's collection. So he was down south during the Civil War. We have no idea if it is an Indian skull. And if so, where it came from, we have no idea. And we're trying to trace it, but it's like, is this really an artifact, an Indian artifact, or did somebody just put a label on it? So, are you sure that what you have is actually a real artifact? I mean, I have some arrow points that my father collected from New Mexico in the 20s. And I think they probably aren't real. I think they probably came from, a tourist trap or something, because I don't think they're actually real. So it's, it's iffy. If you're positive it's real, then yes, you got to trace it down. But if you don't know, it's a real problem trying to establish.
Also with human remains, if you do have human remains in your collection, consider writing that into your collections policy. How you will store, deal with, exhibit human remains, or if you will not have human remains at all. I'm not sure if our collections policy addresses it, since we don't have any, but at previous places that I have worked, it has been explicitly against the collections policy to have human remains. And we don't consider hair that is not attached to a body as human remains, so you can still have hair work. It's pretty much just bones, things that are identifiably human and just remains. I'll reopen the chat, see if there are any other questions in there.
Great. I'll just quick note too, not to put a wrench in all of this stuff, but beyond sort of Indigenous collections, field-wide, there is also a big push related to restitution for colonized works as well. So obviously for us, that would tend to be for donors who were collectors of some type and then might have donated to the Historical Society. But just an awareness of what you have for what I might call world collections is something to also be aware of. And work towards thinking about what your collections policies talk about for that.
Right, and even beyond collections policies, the legality of the entire provenance of an object. I doubt that anyone who's on this call has Nazi looted art, but any kind of looted anything or something that was stolen a long time ago, if that can be proven, you can still not be held criminally liable for it, but you can be obligated to then return it to its rightful owner if somebody down the line before it was donated to you stole it at some point. Kind of a tangential thing. Somebody stole a gun from us once. They smashed through a case and they took out a gun that was on display. And we couldn't find it for like a decade. And then it showed up at Christie's auction. And we reached out to them and we said, look, this is ours. Somebody stole it. And they said, show us the police report, which we didn't file because we didn't want people to stop donating to us. So we had to go to the police and file a report and get them to go and take it from Christie's and give it back to us. So now it's back in our collection. So if something gets stolen from you, also have the paperwork to track that.
Hi, Mary Lou Willits again. well, 20 years ago, we had a reliable costume expert who was at Dartmouth College, and she is long ago retired. And we have some costumes found in the collection that are not dated. And I wondered, is there anyone currently in Vermont that you could recommend who could help with dating costumes?
Oh yeah, I could do that.
Great, Teresa. I'll be in touch.
All right, yeah, send me an email. I can come out and look at them.
Okay, thank
We'll be
you.
up tomorrow.
Mhm. Yes, Angie, insurance.
Yeah, so items in the collection should be insured. Yes, yes, okay.
Yes.
And is there special insurance for that? Like, to be honest, I'm also relatively new to my organization, so I haven't seen the insurance paperwork. I'm not sure I would understand it if I were to look at it. What should I be looking for to make sure that our collections items are covered under that insurance?
I think your best bet would be to go to your insurance rep, and because there are a couple of options of what you can have, and which thing will be both cost effective and coverage effective is going to vary depending on what your collection is and the value of certain items. You can have fine arts insurance, which is best if you want to individually cover things for specific amounts. You can also have umbrella insurance that covers everything that you own. It's I think what we have right now is umbrella insurance, and with that you don't have to go through and kind of submit specific appraisals for everything. It's as it comes up. So you just want to make sure that the objects that themselves are covered and not just like your building and your monetary assets. A lot of them will require a third-party appraisal if it's above a certain amount, and below a certain amount, it's depending on the company, will allow you to do the estimate of fair market value, but sometimes will ask for proof. So if you're valuing your own collection, keep a paper trail of how you're coming up with those numbers.
Okay, thanks. The objects, right? That's what I need to make sure the objects are insured. But is there going to be a difference between making sure that like my work laptop and our printer and the furniture is versus the like quote unquote collection and the artifacts?
Oh,
is there going to
Rachel
be different
says that there
insurance,
is
or is
a
it just gonna be like,
webinar.
okay, thanks, Rachel.
It honestly depends. Depends. I have worked somewhere where it's one insurance policy for everything, and I have worked other places that have a specific insurance policy for the accession objects and a different one outside, and that's because they had different expectations for reporting. So you had to inventory your museum objects once every X number of years. But they didn't want to do that for everything else. So that was a different insurance policy. But your insurance rep will be able to point you to really what is best for your specific situation. So we were always under the impression that it would be way too expensive to insure objects. And as they aren't replaceable, why go through the expense of appraising and insuring anything other than the building? So it's not always about the replacing them, because it's just Angie's in the center of my screen, so I'll use an Ethan Allen object. We have a flask that was owned by Ethan Allen, and there's no way that you could replace that if it was destroyed. So giving it a monetary value for replacement feels useless. But if we had it in our storage and our sprinklers went off and it got damaged by water, insurance would help with the conservation costs. And if you have objects that are on loan in an exhibition for you, your insurance has to cover those. So you would be paying the monetary replacement value to the lenders. So it's not always about replacing an object that is completely destroyed. It's often about stopping further damage after a damaging event occurs. Oh, and oh man, did everybody hear about the art show in Florida last week where somebody knocked over a Koontz and it turned out not to be a big deal because it was covered by insurance? Oh, so stressful. So also things like that. If you're taking your objects around into the community and people are handling them or walking close to them in a way where they're not really paying attention to their body, it can be useful to have some kind of insurance that if they knock over a glass and it breaks, that you're going to be able to afford to pay somebody to glue it back together. Has anyone here used in their insurance for a collections object before? That's good.
Yeah. Well, we've got just about a minute or so before 1 o'clock. So I don't know if any last minute questions, anything that comments people want to make, any issues we haven't kind of gone over already.
I did put in the chat about if there's any kind of clearinghouse. So maybe we don't want it, but somebody else wants or needs it to round out their collection. The more we're getting back into our historical collections, the more people are feeling comfortable coming forward and saying, oh, I have something too, which is a blessing and a curse. And so hence me being on this to try to sort that out. And then one person finds out and they tell their 85-year-old neighbor and things that they've been holding, you know, all the reasons why these things come to us over the years. So that might be interesting. Or if there's, you know, anyhow, if somebody really wants to round out their collection with whatever it is.
Unfortunately, there's not. And I think a lot of it has to do with optics around deaccessioning and preservation and such. What we do internally is if it has something specific to do with the mission of another institution. So for example, if somebody gave us a bunch of stuff from Virgins that we already had, then we would specifically reach out to you or but for things that have lost their provenance, like bags of clothes, it's so broad that we don't reach out unless we know somebody has a need. So yeah, if you guys have holes in your collection that you're looking to fill with non-specific objects, send them through the email list that Eileen has set up so that we'll know to keep you in mind.
And then maybe the other sort of category is, you know, certainly areas like if it's Regens or around here. The other is, as we talked about before, archaeological objects, which we may or may not know whether it's Abnaki or pre-Abnaki. So, because people are always digging those up, as we know. And finding them and did that back in the last 50 years. So they're sitting in people's homes and it feels like they're coming out more, so to speak, these days.
Yeah, when people bring them to us, we tell them that it is against our collections policy. And then we send them over to Jess. We figure that if he doesn't want them, he knows where to send them.
Right. Yeah, and I think Teresa, that sort of gets me back to, again, we were talking about beforehand of our the taxidermy fish guy. I don't know if you want to mention that.
Oh yeah, so we are getting open storage. So somebody heard that we are going to have this extra storage space, and so we have much more room to be able to accept more things. So brought something in on that basis, and unfortunately, it was something that we couldn't accept because it's taxidermy, and we don't collect taxidermy. And I have found that to be a really good using your mission as a scapegoat for telling people no. Because a lot of people don't want to hear no. It's the most precious thing to them. You see precious things 80 times a day, but they only have one. But if you can blame this non-specific scapegoat that's not in the room, the collections policy prohibits it. It makes it a lot easier to get people to leave the building with their object.
So this was a taxidermy fish. Let's hear it.
Oh, that's it. That's the story. It's not interesting. His mom caught the fish in Vermont. It was very precious to them, and it's more precious now that when you take a fish to get mounted, they don't send you the fish back. They make a cast of it, and then they fill the cast up with styrofoam. So it is an interesting artifact in that sense, and that it's a real fish, and they're not making those anymore. But we're not the right museum for that.
And if they leave without taking the object with them, because that's happened at the Homestead Museum, people just like leave it in the lobby.
Drop-offs.
Can you do you legally have to accept it as abandoned property and go through that process, or can you call the police for like unaccompanied luggage kind of thing?
So what we have decided, and I'm not a lawyer and I am not giving you legal advice here, but what we have decided is that based partially on the recent Tucker Carlson lawsuit, where he successfully argued that no reasonable person would believe that he was news, we have used that argument to say that no reasonable person who leaves an object on the ground outside in front of our museum expects it to be preserved since they left it outside on the ground. So it moves from abandoned property to illegal dumping, and gives us the freedom to throw it away. And I have sent emails to everybody on the staff that if somebody tries to leave the building without their object, to follow them out to their car and put it in their car. Don't actually do that. You might get hurt, but
Do your best.
yeah.
It's like zucchinis.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Any other comments, questions, last minute things that folks want to talk about? And oh, you're muted again. Oh, there we go.
This is slightly off, but I have a friend from South Royalton who's going through her father's stuff, and he was a civil engineer, and she has records of pay scales and what he paid for materials. This was back in the 20s and 30s. And she doesn't know what to do with them. She said South Royalton doesn't have the space for it. But is it something that the Historical Society or some society that's interested in the history of materials and building, back in the 20s and 30s?
Maybe our collection is split between 3D objects and paper objects. So I'm not the person for that. That's our librarian, and she can definitely reach out to our librarian. I mean, space everywhere is a concern, so I couldn't give you an answer. Yeah. But another option could be an industrial museum collection.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll follow up after this with a link to the recording, as well as I think a couple of our forms and such for folks. But it's been really great to talk today. And again, our next last virtual roundtable for this session is next month on the 23rd, and we'll be talking about community engagement strategies. So we're looking forward to that as well. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks.